G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and let's get talking about the week that was, recapping all the big performances, the stinkers, and who are the must-add players and the players you can drop. Let's go!
Jordan open, Chicago with the lead! Bryant to Shaq!
Not a game. We talking about practice.
LeBron James with no regard for human life. Anything's possible.
Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang!
Curry for three. Wow! Unbelievable. Making it rain in New York.
We the North are now we the champions.
Not the destination, it's the journey. Mamba out.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. Recapping the week, so going through all of the big performances, as we said off the top of the show. If you haven't already, my most recent podcast dropped my picks for the All-Star starters. Obviously, a little bit of a step outside the normal fantasy basketball chat, but if you want to have a look at my opinions over there and you want to talk real basketball, head over and check those ones out. But like we said, normal sort of recap show here after the week that was. So starting off with our, my personal favorite award. The Sweet Fantasy Basketball Award this week goes to Kyrie Irving, and I believe that he is the first player this season that has gotten this award twice. Now, when I first set out trying to do these weekly awards sort of things, I never sort of had the rule of like, oh, you can only win it once or that sort of thing. Maybe with the Dynasty one, I kind of wanted to highlight different players each week, but for the dud and the Sweet Fantasy Basketball Awards, whoever was sort of just the best performer that week was going to get the award, and Kyrie Irving is actually in fact the first player to do it for 2 times this season. Obviously missed a chunk of the season while I was away in Europe on holidays, but still a lot of the season and a lot of different players have had this award. So Kyrie Irving, his last week has been the number 1 ranked player per game. He's putting up 38.7 points, 5 threes, 8 rebounds, 7.3 assists, 2.7 steals with 2 games where he had 4 steals in both of them, 0.7 blocks, and an amazing 52.5% from the field, 90% from the free throw line, and only a single turnover in that time as well, per game, that is. So contributing in every single category so far. There was obviously a lot of panic with Kyrie earlier in the season, and you know, it seems like a little while ago now, but obviously people were concerned about his off-court issues and whether or not the suspension that the team gave him would cause them to eventually trade him. But I guess, you know, winning basketball games kind of covers over a multitude of sins. So he's been playing excellent, kind of keeping his head out of trouble so far since then, and has been really, really good from a fantasy basketball point this season. He's the 11th ranked player on the entire season. The last month, he's the 9th ranked player, so he's a first-round player. We did say this off the top when we were drafting back at the start of the season, that he was a first-round player that you could have gotten in the second round. I've drafted him in a couple of redraft leagues because I thought he was really good value. Apart from that little dip in sort of, you know, confidence that he was going to be available to me. He's been relatively healthy. He even had a game, he missed one game this week against the San Antonio Spurs. I'm trying to remember exactly why that was. It might have just been a resting game, but came back straight away, put up 38 minutes, 39 minutes, and 40 minutes in his last 3 games. So big minutes, obviously with some players out. So he is someone that, so far, touch on wood, has been healthy, apart from that suspension, just with a few games here and there for rests and things like that. And with the Brooklyn Nets doing well, I think that hopefully that means that things won't get shaken up too much on this team, and we'll just continue to get more the first round per game Kyrie, and hopefully, like we said, he can be available for our fantasy playoffs when it comes time. So if you manage to grab him and you didn't panic when those suspensions came in, I think that you are being rewarded now, and I think that you have a really good fantasy player on your team that can hopefully help you win some matchups. So that is the positive award. Let's get negative for a second. Yes, the loser of the week is Jusuf Nurkic. Now, Nurkic, last week, 3 games, putting up 4 points per game, 8 rebounds, 1.3 assists, less than a steal, less than a block, shooting 23% from the field. He hit his 1 free throw for the week, which is, that's cool. It's not hurting you a lot there, but 2.5 turnovers, just a real couple of duds this week. Last game he put up 2 points, 3 rebounds. The game before that, 4 points, 11 rebounds, 6 points, 10 rebounds, and just not a whole lot else going for him. Just in a really, really big shooting slump at the moment. However, for the season, he is the 97th ranked player. He obviously is a little bit down in terms of free throw percentage and 3. So if you punt those categories, he's substantially better in those team builds. He's kind of doing what I expected him to do for the most part. We haven't seen those blocks come back up to where they were, where we hoped back in the day, where he could have been that breakout sort of a guy. So I think he's basically doing what I expected him to do, and this is just kind of just, that small sample size, so I'm not worried really with him at all. The minutes have been a bit all over the place, even in the last month or two. You look back over his past couple of game logs, he's had a 16-minute game last game, 24, 29, 20, 23, 32, 31, 38. There was a game where he played 13 minutes. He was out with... took a hit to the face and then backed it up with a 26. So it's a bit all over the place. Obviously, the centers, when they're not that elite kind of level, are subject to those kind of games, potentially maybe not suiting their style, that maybe teams go a bit more small. And I think that Nurkic is just the victim of that. So on the season, averaging 28 minutes, pretty bang on where I expected him to be. So I think that there's no real surprises with Nurkic this week, which was a disaster, obviously, is just sort of due to the fact of a small sample size and a poor shooting slump. And when we get that 23% up back to the 52% that he's doing for the season, that obviously will be much better for his overall value. And, he was a 257th ranked player this past week. Obviously, that's terrible, but top 100 for the season. If you're punting free throws or you're punting threes or both, he is obviously someone who is edging close to that top 50 kind of level for you. And I think that's kind of what we should expect moving forward. Nothing too much to talk about Jusuf Nurkic for him. He, I think also, just to mention as well, he was, limited by fouls a little bit in the last couple of games. So the last 3 games of this week, 4 fouls, 5 fouls, and 5 fouls in all of those games. So some of those minutes that we talked about, perhaps it is always coming back down to the foul trouble. I'm looking down his game log right now, and there is a lot of games, actually every single game in the past month, he's had at least 3 fouls, most of them being 4, 5, and some of them even fouling out. So, those fouls are limiting maybe a little bit of upside, so hopefully he can clean that up and stay out and without fouling a bit much. But again, centers in the NBA currently at the moment, they're especially if they're slower ones like a Nurkic, just find it tough to stay out of foul trouble these days. So you might just have to put up with that moving forward and just cross your fingers that he is not going to have a week like this when it counts the most in your fantasy playoffs. So, but that, I guess, is the luck of head-to-head fantasy basketball. The last and final award, here we go. Every day a star is born, and I probably should have talked about this player already. I mean, it's the Future Dynasty Award, this Dynasty Star Award. This guy is a current Dynasty Star Award. He's a current star in the NBA, really, when it comes to fantasy especially. But Alperen Sengun is this week's Future Dynasty Star Awards. And I want to highlight him because I just wanted to talk about how high could this guy go in terms of his fantasy upside next season, in the next 5 seasons. He is the 69th ranked player on a per game basis on the season, which is very smack bang about where I had him ranked. I think obviously if you're punting the threes, you're punting the turnovers, he rises a little bit from that. So From the season, I think you get a really good value, but especially the last month and the last 2 weeks, he has been absolutely cooking. So the last 2 weeks, he's averaging 19 points, 11 rebounds, 7 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks, 68% from the field. The free throws are down a fair bit, 54% in that time, and he is still a top 20 player in that time, and he's also averaging 3.5 turnovers. So there is significant room for him to improve on those numbers, which is wild to say. But if he gets that 54% up to 74%, which is in line with what he's doing for the entire season, if he did that instead of the 54% on 4 attempts, we're talking like a first-round player. We are genuinely talking about a first-round player, and the dude is 20 years old. He's not even 21. He can't drink in the States at the moment. I think I've said this for a while. He's the best player on the Houston Rockets. I believe I might have even said it when he was drafted at the time. I was a little bit down on Jalen Green. Obviously, Green has maybe a high ceiling as that prototypical scoring athletic wing, and I acknowledge that. But right now, whilst Green is still sort of working on consistencies, Alperen Sengun is clearly their best player, and I think it is finally being noticed by, it's finally been noticed by the coach, for number one, who, they're seeming to run the team and the offense through him a lot recently. And he has been just incredible. He's had big minutes the last few games, which is something that, let's just firstly highlight the fact that he was coming off the bench at the start of the season. A healthy Alperen Sengun was coming off the bench so that Bruno Fernandes could start the season. I know lots of people have talked about it before, but we still need to highlight it because of how stupid that move was at the time and how stupid it looks even now to this day. So shout out to you, Stephen Silas, who I think potentially is the worst coach in the NBA. But at least now we are seeing what we should have been seeing from the start of the season, the offense run through him. Now, Kevin Porter Jr. is out. I wonder if he is benefiting from that in terms of the playmaking responsibilities. But I don't know how you could watch this man play and not see what I'm seeing and see that this guy is like a mini Sabonis, a mini Jokic kind of type, that playmaking big man who is just so savvy, so smart, and at 20 years old, the sky is the absolute limit for this guy. I think that we're definitely on track to hit his ceiling outcome. And remember when we talked about, I think it was last season when we're talking about those dynasty rookie rankings, like he was up there with the Scotty Barnes, with the Josh Giddeys, and with the Jalen Greaves and Jalen Suggs there for me. I think he was right up there. And I said that he probably had the highest upside out of all of those players. Maybe the lowest chance at reaching that upside, but his upside was genuinely a top 12, top 10 fantasy player. And he is absolutely on track to do that. So do you value him there? I probably wouldn't go that far, but he is fast approaching top 20 fantasy dynasty asset. Again, I don't have a rankings for dynasties at the moment. It is something that I'm going to be doing next season. I'm going to be absolutely keeping a closer eye on my dynasty rankings in the future. But just from sort of how I'm viewing him, I probably see him around that top 20 mark. Perhaps he's overtaken a player like an Evan Mobley, especially. Maybe I still think Evan Mobley is a better player than Sengun. I would rather start my franchise with him. But from a fantasy point of view, the assists, he's not renowned as a good defender, but on the season, 0.8 steals, 1 block per game. And that's in the 27.5 minutes. In 33 minutes in the last 2 weeks, it's 1.5 and 1.5. In the last month, it's 1.1 and 1.1 in 29.5 minutes. So he can easily be a 1-on-1 steal and block guy. He can easily be close to that 20 points, 6 or 7 assists, 10 rebounds, and the efficiency from the field is amazing. And I wouldn't expect him normally to kill you from the free throw line. And he could even become a bit of a threat from 3-point range. He could average maybe a 3 per game when he starts to extend his range. So the sky really is the limit for Alperen Sengun. And obviously we all know he's good, but I think there's genuine opportunity for him to be a top 12, top 10 fantasy player. How early? Maybe next season is a bit of a stretch, but it wouldn't completely shock me. But perhaps in 2 years, he's a perennial top 15, top 12 first round guy. he's just so good in so many areas and that unique kind of player that can fill up the stat sheets in every possible way. So for me, it's hard to sort of oversell Sengun as a guy. You know, if you've been listening to this podcast for any longer than sort of 12 to 18 months, you know how high both myself and Callum were on Sengun. So it is very exciting to see him really start to pop this last month, this last 2 weeks. The last week in 3 games per game, he was the 7th ranked player. Again, small sample size, always dangerous, but it's just really giving us a sample of what this man can do. So he is your future and probably current Dynasty star for this week. All right, let's move on to some hot topics and breaking news. Nothing major this week. Couple of little injuries we're going to go through. LaMelo Ball injured himself. However, he is questionable for Monday. Some thought that he might be out for weeks. Now, he's listed as questionable. I probably doubt that he plays, but just the fact that he is listed as questionable gives me a little bit of optimism that the injury maybe isn't that serious as we once thought. I still think, he might miss maybe a few more games, but perhaps it's not going to be weeks like we feared. We'll talk about some ads later on, but Dennis Smith Jr. was probably the guy that benefits the most. I don't think necessarily he's a must-add, must-roster player, but he obviously is the guy that does benefit. But LaMelo Ball, obviously, he's had a terrible season in regards to injuries with the ankle earlier in the year. He's re-aggravated it several times, so that's always the worry. But at least questionable tag is something that is moving in the positive direction. The other injury that came from this week was the Mitchell Robinson injury. So he's going to be missing a little bit of time. Now, I tweeted out that Isaiah Hartenstein was the grab, or the guy that you sort of look to. That was obviously, he hasn't been doing well, but he and Jericho Sims is the guy with the highest upside. And for me, when those kind of things happen, you grab the guy with the highest upside, and then if it works out, amazing, you've got a huge steal in your hand. If it doesn't work out, well then, whatever, you move on to the next guy. And it clearly just hasn't worked out so far. So you took a swing on him. If you grabbed him, added him, you've seen a couple of games, I think you drop him, move on. Jericho Sims seems to be the guy that is the one that benefits the most here. And again, we'll talk about him when it comes to the waiver wire ads, but obviously he is the early favorite to take the biggest jump and the benefit from that injury for Mitchell Robinson, who should still be out for maybe another couple of weeks at least. So good to ride him while we can. And then the last injury news that happened today, Marcus Smart injured his ankle. So he's already been ruled out for tomorrow's game, the Monday game. Brogdon is also out for that game with personal reasons. Marcus Smart ankle didn't look the best, so I wouldn't be surprised. Celtics have been very cautious with a lot of injuries so far this season, resting Al Horford the entire season. Robert Williams obviously being very cautious with him. You've got good backups in Brogdon and in Derek White there. So I think Marcus Smart maybe, even if it's minor, he's probably going to miss a few games. So I think that the ad here is obviously Derek White. Again, we'll talk about him later, but I think that ruling him out this far is no surprise. I don't know if it's going to be too long, but maybe he misses a week, maybe 2 weeks, I think would be the best guess for me, but should be obviously back for your fantasy playoffs. So no long-term concern for Marcus Smart. I'd probably obviously be holding him in most situations. I'm hoping that you're punting field goal percentage, or that your field goal percentage is so strong that it doesn't matter, that he obviously is not the best contributor in that category. So those were the injuries on the negative. On the positive, we had Cameron Johnson return. Now, he came back and then missed a couple of games and then played again today. It's tough because he's obviously a guy that before the injury was a must-add, must-roster player. Since coming back, it's been a bit underwhelming. That first game was very positive to see. 19 points, 2 threes, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, 2 blocks. Really good game across the board. This most recent game, so he missed one then against Indiana on the first leg of a back-to-back, and then played again today against Memphis. 29 minutes is super encouraging. 8 points, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, but no threes, no steals, shot poorly. It was a bad game, but I think that I think he is someone that you still want to make sure is on your team and on your roster, because I think he is just someone that we've seen a large sample size of him being a must 12-team roster player. And the most encouraging thing to me is the fact that he played the 29.5 minutes. So that, to me, is like the biggest sign. And I think the Phoenix Suns really need all they can get right now. So, miss that back-to-back. I wonder how long that lasts for, but I think that he is someone, despite the poor game today, that I would be absolutely holding on to. And I wouldn't be getting impatient with a player like him. He is rostered in 100% of advanced leagues out there. So he won't be appearing on the waiver wire show. But if he is on your waiver wire, I would 100% go and grab him. If someone was impatient, dropped him after this poor game, I'd be scooping him straight back up and giving him a little bit more time. So I think that is positive for him. And then the last positive news on the injury front, Anthony Davis. The reports are that he could be back as early as this week. Again, this whole time they've been so cryptic with Anthony Davis, his injury and his return to play. But this is obviously a positive sign, and there has been some momentum with him coming back. So I think, look, it's maybe we've avoided the worst case scenario, which is a good thing, obviously. I do still think, however, that the Lakers are going to be extremely cautious with him coming back. Obviously, they're not really going anywhere, but then again, they don't have their own draft pick, so I guess they're going to maybe try and fight to get to that play-in tournament and give LeBron every chance to make something of this postseason, which I guess does make a lot of sense. Number one ranked player on the per-game basis. I think that you might see that drop with him, obviously coming back a bit slowly, maybe a bit limited. They're going to be very cautious. I'd imagine he's going to be resting some back-to-backs. It's stress injuries, so these injuries need a slow ramp-up period. They need the team to be more cautious than, just your typical aggravation of something or a strain or something like that. A stress injury very much requires the load to be managed for a player. So be ready to ride those bumps, to be ready to sort of see how he goes. Maybe, I know it's Anthony Davis, but maybe you don't activate him the first game he is back. But there is some hope that he is coming back soon. When that is, I don't exactly know. Again, still very cryptic, but the good news is that he looks like he is getting closer to coming back to the team. So that is always positive. Let's go on to the waiver wire. Now, this week, I don't really think there's really any new must-add players. The only player I've got listed here, TJ McConnell. Obviously a must-add player. There is still 5% of leagues out there, according to Basketball Monster, that he is available in active leagues. So for those leagues out there, I ask you, what are you doing? Can you guys wake up and go and add this guy? He has put up some phenomenal stat lines over the last week, as I pull him up on Basketball Monster. He is someone who has been obviously giving a huge boost to assists and steals, but in the last week, he's the 41st ranked player. That's on a 4-game sample, averaging 16 points, 1.3 threes, 4.5 rebounds, 8.3 assists, 1.8 steals, and 66% from the field. Now, he is actually a really good field goal percentage guy for a guard, and he's put up lots of great games. He had that quieter game, 8 points, 3 rebounds, and 6 assists with no steals, but the game was a huge blowout. He played under 20 minutes. All the other games, he's played 25 or more, and, even 6 assists is still useful. He shot 100% from the field. Like, that's still a decent game in 20 minutes, so 100% must-roster player. But I don't really see anyone else this week that is in that category. So we're going to have a bit of a longer maybe add, maybe roster players in this next group here. And the person I want to lead off the show with is a Thomas Bryant. Now, he was a guy, shout out to the guy who's been hassling me on Twitter the whole time. Every time that Thomas Bryant put up a good line, he's been tagging me. And look, I made the comment earlier when Anthony Davis initially went down that I thought that Thomas Bryant was an ad. I don't think he's a good player, but I said he was an ad anyway because if he gets minutes, he can put up stats. And that's been the case so far, and he has done that. Now, up until recently, the last couple of weeks, he's been trending down in a major way. So, we've had games of 6.6 rebounds, 8.4 rebounds, 8.7 rebounds. Poor shooting. The minutes have been trending down. He's been, the last sort of several games, 24, 20, 18 minutes, 22 minutes. It's been trending down. So he was very much getting close to that drop territory. And then all of a sudden he comes out and drops this huge game, 31 points, 4 threes, 14 rebounds, and 1 block. So I'm sure that guy out on Twitter will be very happy to see this game. But I think that so if someone had dropped him, I think you could go ahead and add him. He's 69% rostered in advanced ownership leagues according to Basketball Monster. But just be aware that obviously with Anthony Davis coming back soonish, that the value is limited and you might still have a lot of these ups and downs coming your way because, when Gabriel was outplaying him for a lot of that stretch, they went small in some stretches. And I maintain, this is just a side little rant here, I maintain that a player can put up fantasy stats and be good at fantasy and still be a bad NBA player. Like, those two things can exist. And when I say that I don't think someone's good, it doesn't necessarily, I always try to preface that with my thoughts on what they are as from a fantasy point of view and my thoughts on them from a real life NBA point of view. And sometimes those things can affect each other. And in the Thomas Bryant situation, my thoughts were, yes, you add him now, see where it goes, but it wouldn't shock me if he's that bad that he's not going to be getting enough minutes. And we saw that for a good stretch there. Now, obviously before that, he was really, really good and provided amazing value. But it eventually showed its colours, and I think obviously with Davis coming back soon that the value of Thomas Bryant is going to come to an end at some point. But if he was dropped, you could go ahead and add him, but again, expect to ride some bumps along the way. The next guy here that we're going to talk about, I touched on him last week, but just wanted to mention him again, Andrew Nembhard. He's had a couple of rough games, but he is someone I still think that you could potentially add if other people have dropped him, been a bit impatient with him. His shooting percentages has just absolutely fallen off a cliff. Maybe he required Tyrese Halliburton to set him up a little bit more, so there's something maybe to that. But he's still giving you good assists and good steal numbers. I think that the field goal percentage, the last 2 weeks he's been shooting 28%. On the season, 43%. So instead of shooting 28%, can you shoot 40%? And that makes that 8.3 points. Does that make that 11 or 12 points? Look, there's something to that. 11 points, 1 threes, 3 rebounds, 6 assists, 1 steal, and he's not absolutely murdering a field goal percentage. That's a good player to have on your roster. But it definitely makes it easier if you're punting field goal percentage, absolutely. So if you are that team and you're punting field goal percentage, I think he is definitely a good add still while Halliburton is out. And but I think that he's not a must roster for every team, obviously, with how he's playing. He's still obviously young, and obviously the inconsistencies are something that we might have to just expect moving forward. The next guy here, we're going to talk about Derek White. Again, we touched on him with the news of Marcus Smart and Malcolm Brogdon. So he's an excellent stream. Celtics start the week with a back-to-back. So in terms of streaming, he would be my number one pick for the stream to start the week. And again, we just monitor the news of Marcus Smart and how long he's out for. And Derek White is someone who is kind of been teetering around that sort of 12-team league value anyway, so I think that this shoots him up to the top 100 at least while Marcus Smart is out, and then maybe back sort of towards that 140, 150 zone while he's in. So I think that he's an excellent add for short-term value, and you could definitely do worse. We talked about Dennis Smith Jr. Now, he is someone, we add him for assists, we add him for steals, and potentially some blocks from your guards as well, but he is obviously there because of LaMelo Ball's injury. If I just check his game that he had today, it was not, they haven't been blowing us away, but 7 assists in both of his last couple of games, a steal in both of those games. The percentages in terms of the field goal have been horrible. That could definitely improve. The minutes, 28 minutes in the last 2 games. So he is someone that, if this shooting comes around, if that's 20... instead of 27%, if that's 43%, again, similar story to Nembhard, you're looking at someone that's putting up 14, 7 assists, a steal, not murdering your field goal percentage, which he probably will from time to time, but I still think that he is someone you grab for the assists and steals, and he's providing that for you. So, whilst he hurts you in other areas, he is still doing what we expected him to do. So, he is still an add if you need those things. Josh Richardson, I had on the Droppable podcast, or the Droppable section of the podcast last week, and he's been good. He has been sort of proving me wrong. I still worry about the minutes, 22 minutes last game, but still put up 17 points, 3 threes, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and a steal. I just think that eventually those minutes just win out, but for the time being, while he's riding hot, you could add him and use him as maybe just a stream and see how it goes. The Spurs had a lower volume week last week, hence why he was on that droppable show. They've got more games this week, so I think that if that's not an issue now anymore, you can then pick him back up and sort of hope that it continues, but don't be surprised if it definitely dries up with those low minutes. Next guy here, Quentin Grimes, is the one that I want to highlight. Now, he's just kind of like that. I compare him a little bit to maybe a slightly more exciting KCP, but low usage kind of a player. Just does enough to sort of be ranked okay. 134th the last week, 152nd the last 2 weeks. That's on 30 minutes a night. It's the 2 threes. It's the decent percentages, low turnovers, rebounds, assists are kind of there in little bits, but it is all pretty boring. He's probably more suited to like a roto format, or if you're a team that maybe isn't punting very heavily, he can contribute in a few different things. The threes are nice, and he can have games where he goes off for decent stat lines, but overall, he's just really a back-end kind of a guy, but you could do worse than someone like a Quentin Grimes. Gordon Hayward is an interesting one. He obviously has been very disappointing this season. Maybe we should have expected this, and to a degree we did, but obviously on the season per game, he's 203rd this season, which is obviously way down the rankings, but the last week, 64th ranked player. I mean, it was one game, so again, probably not really reliable, but 9 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, a steal, 2 blocks. He's maybe an ad. Like, we do know that the per game, the value has been there, but again, this season, he's putting up 32 minutes a night, and outside the top 200, that's pretty gross. So potentially he can turn it around, but again, I'm not super enthused, and if you missed out on him, I'm not worried too much. He is 91% rostered, according to Basketball Monster, on competitive leagues, but yeah, he's just past it, really. I mean, this team, he's injured all the time. Even when he's back in and playing those games, it's less than ideal. Look, I still think he has the capability of giving you good points, giving you good assists, and on decent percentages. So he's okay. You could do worse, but by no means is a must-add player. Delon Wright is an interesting name to talk about. Now, he is someone, I got asked a question a few days ago about some options, and I think it was Dennis Smith Jr., Delon Wright, and I can't remember the other name, blanking off the top of my head, but I went with Delon Wright because I feel as though he's got the opportunity in front of him. Washington are not very deep at point guard. Monty Morris came over in the offseason, but he hasn't necessarily lit the world on fire. But Delon Wright has got a very, very friendly fantasy game about him in terms of the steals, the decent blocks for a guard. He's shooting the ball really well. The assists are solid as well. He's not going to score a ton or hit a lot of threes, but in terms of just those steals, defensive stats, not really hurting you in those percentages and turnovers, he's a really, really solid player. And especially if you're punting points, if you're punting threes or both, he is someone, in the last 2 weeks, he's 61st ranked player. The last month, he's top 90. He is definitely someone that, and that's all within less than 25 minutes a night. So he's putting up really good stats in limited minutes with the opportunity that he could potentially push that up. Maybe he's just better than Monty Morris in terms, especially on the defensive end. He is just someone that I think that you could definitely just add him, see how it goes. Hopefully this continues, and there is a lot of upside. So of everyone on this list, I think that he might have the highest ceiling and the highest ceiling to maintain for the rest of the season. So if you're really thinking about rest of season value, Delon Wright, out of all of these guys, maybe outside of a Derek White, I think is someone that is probably the highest upside swing on this list here today. So 47% owned in competitive leagues, according to Basketball Monster. He is someone that I think you could definitely have a crack at, especially if you need those assists and steals. And then finally, we talked about him a little bit before, but Jericho Sims is someone who obviously is benefiting from the injury to Mitchell Robinson. And look, I like, he's obviously stupidly athletic. he's pretty one-dimensional in terms of what he does on the court. From a fantasy sense, the field goal percentage, 92% in his last 3 games. He's a dunker. Like, he's not going to do much else except for dunk the basketball. Last game, put up 10 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, and a block. Pretty good game. Game before that, 12 points, 8 rebounds, 2 steals. He's just going to be okay. I don't necessarily think he's a must-add player. He's kind of, like I said, one-dimensional, so in terms of what he does across the board, if you need the rebounds and field goal percentage with maybe a little bit of blocks, he can do that for you, but he's not going to help you in assists. He's not going to help you in threes. He's not going to help you in free throw percentage, or scoring really for that matter either. So very traditional big man, a good stream/short-term add while Mitch Robinson is out if you need those big man categories. So he's obviously the one that is benefiting whilst Mitch Robinson is injured, and you can go ahead and drop Isaiah Hartenstein, like I mentioned here, as we move over to the droppable players. I've also got Jared Vanderbilt on this list again, just to remind people that I think that he's just not going to come back into those big minutes that we'd hoped him to get. He might pop off here and there with a decent game and sort of maybe think that you might regret it from time to time, but I don't think it's going to be consistent. Lou Dort is someone who I think is rostered in too many players. If I just pull up him here on Basketball Monster, he's just he's never really been the best category league guy. He's probably more of a points league. He does benefit in teams where you're punting field goal percentage, but overall he's just someone that, look, he's been pretty bad this last week. Had a terrible game today, 7 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. If you looked, if you wanted to have an excuse to drop him, here it is. I know sometimes it's hard to move away from those players when you look at the last 4 games and you see games of 15 points, 22 points, 22 points, and he's hitting lots of threes, but some of those games, 60%, 57%, it's just not sustainable for especially a player like Lou Dort. He's more likely to go sort of 38% than he is 57%. So for me, he's not necessarily a must-hold player. If you're punting field goal percentage or if you're in a points league, it's probably better for you, but on the season, he's ranked 171st. And just not doing a whole lot outside of scoring and maybe threes, and he gets you a steal per game, but a lot of players can do that, in my opinion, and I think there are better players on the waiver wire. Tim Hardaway Jr., I think, is a droppable player. Now, again, very similar to a Lou Dort, that points category, it draws our eyes. We look at it, we see those points that he's scored, 22 points. He scored 22 points today. He's had some big lines, but very, very empty across everywhere else. So on the season, he's 176th. Even with those games, he put up 22 points, 154th the last week. He's just, I think, overrated in fantasy because of the points and threes that he does. Nothing else. The assists are invisible. The steals are non-existent. Doesn't get blocks. Terrible from the field. His free throws are even bad this season compared to, obviously, where he normally is. His ranking even includes less than a turnover per game, and he still can't crack the top 170. So just bad everywhere outside of threes. And even though the fact that he can pop off for a decent scoring night every now and again, averaging 14 points on the season, 15 points over the last 2 weeks, it's still just below average. Like, it's not game-changing in terms of that category. So for me, you can do a lot better than having Tim Hardaway, and I'd rather stream that position. And then a pretty similar story with Seth Curry. Again, he benefits a little bit with some injuries over in Brooklyn, but very much more of a streaming kind of a player for threes, in my opinion, than a must-hold player. So for the season, 195th. The last 2 weeks, 154th. Putting up 2 threes, 15 points, but again, just like Tim Hardaway Jr., extremely empty, maybe a little bit more efficient than Tim Hardaway Jr., so I'd probably rather he than Tim Hardaway just because he doesn't hurt you from the field and he can still do those other things like Hardaway can. But yeah, I just think you can do better maybe by streaming his position. Threes, like we've said a million times, are so easily available on your waiver wire. So the value for a player like Seth Curry, I think, is muted a little bit. So That will do it for us today, guys. Let us know if you have any questions down in the comments on YouTube below. If you have been enjoying all these podcasts, go over to your podcast, wherever you get them, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is, and give us a 5-star rating and review. Would really, really appreciate that, guys. If you are into AFL fantasy or want to give it a try this season, head over to our new show, a new podcast with myself and Luke Rodinson, and give us a subscribe and follow over there at the Ball Boys AFL podcast. AFL Fantasy Podcast, that is. And give those videos a watch. We've got lots of videos for you to go through. And make sure, again, if you guys are liking the videos, give this one a big thumbs up. Make sure you guys are subscribed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.